India. Her authors include Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Piyush Pandey, Hussain S. Zaidi, Yuvraj Singh, Hindol Sengupta, of course, and the list keeps going on. I hope to see some more faces as the session progresses. I'm so sorry about this. To the ones who are already here and to our esteemed speakers, the stage is all yours. Can we, whatever people, how many of us are here, I don't know, but then let's give a big round of applause and let's show the post lunch energy, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us after lunch. I think the siesta here is very important, or so I hear. But I hope, Urias have as much appetite for books and reading as well. But to all of you who are here, I hope you enjoy our conversation. We are going to talk about our book, Sing, Dance and Pray, written by Hindol Sengupta. And this is the biography of the founder of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada. So I would like to start, Hindol, by asking you about, who is Srila Prabhupada and how did he get into this life of spirituality that led finally to the formation of ISKCON?
Thank you. Always a joy to be back in Bhubaneswar. I really enjoy coming to your town, and it's beautiful. It's green. It's full of temples. The food is wonderful. So I always really enjoy coming back to Bhubaneswar. I was just telling a friend of mine here that I come to Bhubaneswar really partly to eat the prasad in your temples, but it's always great also if there's a lit fest happening. Thank you, Milee. This is the fifth book or something like that Milee and I have done together.
Yes, the fifth book.
It's been a great success. It's been a national bestseller. I'm very happy about that. Srila Prabhupada is really one of those iconic figures of Indian history, and not just spiritual history, but Indian history, who sadly has not been, is not discussed enough, is not researched enough, because of his movement, the ISKCON movement that he created. Its popularity and its fame far supersedes the memory of its founder, right? Unlike, say, the Ramakrishna Mission, where both the mission and Swami Vivekananda are equally known, in this case, ISKCON is known, but Srila Prabhupada, in a sense, has been forgotten. And this book really was my attempt to reinvigorate a conversation about Srila Prabhupada as one of the seminal figures of Indian history. Now, there are many reasons why Srila Prabhupada is a seminal figure. One of those reasons, of course, is that if you think about how Hinduism went global, after Swami Vivekananda, the most influential character in that story is Srila Prabhupada. In fact, Srila Prabhupada has a much bigger footprint than Swami Vivekananda, who only really went to America and to England, and mainly his footprint was there, a little bit in Europe, but mainly these were the two countries. Whereas Srila Prabhupada, from the age of 70 when he lands in America to the age of about 80 when he dies, in that decade is able to create more than 100 temples across the world, whether it's Australia or South Africa, Switzerland or England, you name the part of the world. In every continent, there is the Hare Krishna movement and an ISKCON temple established by Srila Prabhupada. In that sense, in that generation, Srila Prabhupada is the torchbearer of global Hinduism. He takes the message of global Hinduism to places that it has never gone before, and he's able to attract a global following, including of disciples, of the kind that no other Hindu spiritual guru has ever attracted before. So in that, Srila Prabhupada is a dramatic departure from what happens before him. Also, when Srila Prabhupada leaves his bodily self, in a sense, the people who are in charge of ISKCON, they are all entirely Westerners. So these were the core people who came parampara to the Vaishnavite tradition in India, he really was able to give it a global look and feel and attract people who really came from anywhere in the world to this entire tradition of ISKCON.
Hindol, like you said, Srila Prabhupada found a lot of followers in the US, particularly. And they were from all different sort of, sectors and different stratas of society. There are a lot of hippies. And in the book, you also call him a Swami among hippies. So what were the qualities that Srila Prabhupada had that attracted, all these different kinds of people to him? And what was going on around the world during that time?
Thank you. Well, look, I mean, Srila Prabhupada actually landed in America at a very fertile time in its history. The whole anti-Vietnam War protests were going on at that time. And America, in a sense, was being broken into two. There was an establishment which wanted to push the Vietnam War, and there was a whole, really tens of millions of people who were against the Vietnam War. These two sides were clashing in America. Remember, it was a time of the flower power generation, a move away from, materialism in a sense, a move away from the what we would today call the military industrial complex, and so on and so forth. So Srila Prabhupada, in a sense, was a departure from all that, and he brought a new message. So his message really fell on fertile ground, because to all these people who wanted to move away from war, Srila Prabhupada was giving the message that there is a better way. And what is that better way? Your lifestyle could be better. You could become more spiritual. You could become closer to God. Indeed, you could discover the love of God, which would move you away from the vagaries and the tensions and the battles and the war of that those people saw around them, right? So therefore, his message really fell on very fertile ground. And I think, everything Srila Prabhupada taught his disciples to wash their hands before eating. He taught his disciples to be faithful to one partner, and to be with one partner throughout their life, and discouraged sexual profligacy. In fact, he said, he of course claimed in the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition that people should embrace celibacy, but if they couldn't, then they should remain with one partner through their life. So there was a sanctity. There was a sanctity even in the way he would cook for his disciples. He taught them how to make prasadam. He taught them the value of prasadam. He taught them why it was necessary to offer food to the divine, to God, to Krishna, before eating it yourself. All these little, nuances, which were very Indian and certainly had nothing to do with America, they were all brought in by Srila Prabhupada into the lexicon, into the conversation or with his disciples in America. And I think they saw Srila Prabhupada, his early disciples and all the people who gathered around him, as a dramatically different message from the message that they saw all around them. A message of uber materialism, uber capitalism, a message of excess. All of that was going away with Srila Prabhupada when he appeared in the scene. He was talking about a particular austere, devout way of approaching the divine, approaching God, approaching Krishna, and a lot of people loved it because it to them it marked a cleaner, healthier, more beautiful, more emotionally rich, more spiritually empowered life. And I think that is what attracted so many people to him.
Hindol, there are a lot of evocative passages in the book. And at this point, I'd request you to read one of those so that our audience here who has not yet read the book get a taste and flavor of what is inside this book.
Give me one moment, please. I'm going to read the famous Beatles songwriter and singer. And he was a great devotee of Srila Prabhupada. In fact, the Bhakti Vedanta manor in England, which ISKCON uses even till today, was donated, was an estate that was bought by George Harrison and donated to ISKCON. And, it is George Harrison who, in a sense, introduced Srila Prabhupada to the world of record label making. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, the innovative man that he was, immediately took to it and created his own label, his own record with the Hare Krishna mantra, which also became a global bestseller. So, I was telling some friends at ISKCON that if Srila Prabhupada had lived today, he would have definitely been on Twitter and Instagram, a man who really embraced the technologies of his time to spread, but without giving up on his message. This is important to remember. He was using the technology, but never giving up on the message. He was only using the technology to deliver the message better. And the message, of course, was love of Krishna. Give me one moment. Actually, even before that, I want to read another portion to you. Another of Srila Prabhupada's great disciples was the beatnik poet Allen Ginsberg. And in my research, I discovered this video, which actually many ISKCON people had also not seen, of this famous interaction between Allen Ginsberg, who represented the left, so to speak, and William Buckley Jr., who represented the right and defended the Vietnam War. So they are debating, there are a series of these televised debates on TV. Every evening they would debate the Vietnam War, whether there should be war, and so on and so forth. Something very unique happens there. In the early summer of 1969, Srila Prabhupada appeared on stage at Columbus, Ohio, with his old fan Allen Ginsberg to have some of the most candid conversations on his spiritual mission and what he was trying to achieve in the West. Ginsberg had been associated with ISKCON for a while at that time. In September 1968, he had made the Mahamantra of ISKCON famous across America when he sang it in his famous encounter on television with one of the most famous conservative intellectuals in the country, William Buckley Jr. William Buckley Jr. invited Ginsberg on his TV interview show, Firing Line. The recording on this clash of intellectuals on opposite sides of the political divide, one the icon of counterculture, and the other perhaps the sharpest conservative intellectual of the time in America, is still available on YouTube. The video shows Ginsberg arguing with Buckley about the Vietnam War and the use of chemical weapons, especially the use of napalm by the United States in the war. He argued that the Chinese paranoia for America and the American fear of communist China was feeding off one another, mirror images of one another, and escalating like a barroom brawl. Buckley replied that Ginsberg was naive about politics, at which point the question of Ginsberg reading one of his famous poems was suggested by Buckley. Then something magical happened. Instead, Ginsberg picked up a small harmonium from the floor and proceeded to sing. Before he started to sing, Allen Ginsberg said, "For the preservation of the universe, instead of its destruction, Krishna returns in the Bhagavad Gita. Every time there's a flood, fire, original sin leading to atom bombs." Note the connection between original sin and atom bombs. Then he began to sing, "Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare." And you can see in that video, you can see William Buckley Jr.'s face. He's stupefied. He's never heard something like this before. He's never seen a harmonium in his life. He has no idea why this man suddenly picks this up and starts to sing this. So he actually asked them, "What is this?" And Allen Ginsberg says, "This is a message of peace." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You will not understand it, but if you keep singing it, someday you will understand why instead of war, Krishna urges us to choose peace. So this is one very very interesting incident, and the other one, of course, was with George Harrison, and I want to quickly yes, Millie, go on.
Yeah, no, we'll come to that, and you can look for the page. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you another question,
Yeah.
because as the ISKCON movement, as the Krishna consciousness movement grew, and it started attaining these, popular followers like George Harrison, Allen Ginsberg, there was also opposition and politics
Yeah.
around it, and a lot of it that Srila Prabhupada faced. It is a testament to his organizational skills that he continued to push through and build the organization in around 10 years or so. So give us a little insight on how he did it and how he used, I mean, he didn't have an MBA, right? But he did something in 10 years that several CEOs will struggle to do.
Yeah, I think Srila Prabhupada had a very, how should I put it, a very grassroots understanding of human being. And that grassroots understanding of human beings often helps him in really navigating the logistics that is required to build such a giant movement around the world. Because remember, when ISKCON was building its temples and having its Rath Yatra in San Francisco and so on and so forth, they were constantly navigating through local laws and rules, because it required acquiring land, it required building permissions, it required permissions to hold festivals and events. All of this required constant negotiating with local authorities, municipal authorities, police authorities, and so on and so forth, town planning authorities, and so on and so forth. So Srila Prabhupada, I would argue, basically understood human beings and what would work on a human being, right? What would be the key motivation of a human being? He also understood when people had nefarious motivations. Like there's this part in the book where his disciples are trying to negotiate with a real estate developer to buy some land and build a building. And there's a long exchange of letters, because he would discuss things with them on letters. And first they give some money, and Srila Prabhupada tells them from the very beginning that, look, this man doesn't seem all right to me. But the disciples are young and they're enthusiastic. They really want to build this wonderful temple. So they're negotiating with this guy and they pay him some money, right? And after a few days, those disciples come back and write to Srila Prabhupada that this man has taken the money and now he's refusing to do what he had promised he would do. And Srila Prabhupada writes back saying, look, I told you that this man did not sound right to me. And remember, this is all via letters. Those were not the days when you could have long phone calls or Zoom calls or anything like that, right? Imagine the understanding of a human being, understanding somebody else just via description in the letters, right? And Srila Prabhupada tells them that you should not pay this person a single paisa more, because he's trying to steal our money, right? So like this, there are lots of instances. See, remember, he came from a very, very humble background. And how did they raise their early money? They didn't have vast donations. They would sell books that Srila Prabhupada write, right? So his notings, his diaries are full of jottings that I mentioned in the book on how much money has been donated or how much money has been acquired through sales of books and how much has been spent, right to the last penny, so to speak. So he had to be a very cautious man about worldly affairs, including handling money. Because remember, at one point from those days, ISKCON suddenly, within 10 years, the first 5 years, I would say, was quite difficult, but then began to attract very vast amounts of money. Once this Allen Ginsberg, George Harrison, all these kind of people got associated with ISKCON, it began to attract very vast amounts of money. And that amount of money had to be handled by these disciples. So he had to be very careful about how this money was being deployed, that this money was not being put to bad use. The temples were actually being built. They were being put in the service of the devotees. People were benefiting. So that required almost a managerial approach, right? Of course, he began, the one thing that with him was, like many spiritual leaders, he began with faith. He began that in the name of, with the idea that in the name of God, if you do something, chances are something good will happen, right? And even if something bad happens, it's the will of Krishna. And then Krishna, whatever Krishna takes away, Krishna will give back, so to speak, right? So that very deep-seated, very powerful faith that, as we say, moves mountains, was very much present in Srila Prabhupada. He was able to constantly retain that faith, even when his disciples sometimes felt, oh my God, now, this in my book, there's this thing where they're trying to get, land in Bombay to build, the temple in Bombay. And real estate goons are harassing them, and his poor young devotees, many of them American, they have no idea how to deal with real estate goons in Bombay, right? So they're really struggling. But Srila Prabhupada knew. See, the other thing is, Srila Prabhupada always knew that you need to get the public involved. See, in many cases, what happened is that the public was so much on the side of Srila Prabhupada that his antagonists couldn't do anything. Because there was a public desire for these temples to come up, for this movement to come up. So that really helped him.
No, absolutely. In fact, I was going to ask you about the incident in Bombay where the deity from the ISKCON temple was almost removed, and then last minute, it was saved. I think one of the qualities that really stood him in good stead was his discipline. The lifestyle and discipline of a yogi or a monk. I think that really came in handy because, remember, he was 70 plus, right? And he was trying to build the organization, spread Krishna's love during the daytime, and then write his books during the night. So there was a very strict, a disciplined life that Srila Prabhupada led. Can you tell us a little bit more about, his lifestyle in the US particularly?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, not only did he spend his whole day managing this large movement, growing it, remember, he retired for the night early by about 9 o'clock or so. But by about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, he would be up again because he would write through the night. The man wrote 70 books, more than 70 volumes and books in his own lifetime, right? So every day after his work, his day-to-day work would get over, he would only sleep for 2-3 hours and then get up again and write through the night. And this is how he lived every single day of his life from 70 to 80. I feel that I can barely wake up. I mean, today I was telling my publisher that I'm feeling very sleepy now. Can I go home early, this, that, and the other? I mean, imagine a 70-year-old man. I mean, and the discipline you require to do this, to build this global movement, organize people, deploy money, and in the night keep time to voluminously keep writing and produce book after book. Please remember, apart from ISKCON, the global movement, Srila Prabhupada also created something called the Bhakti Vedanta Book Trust, which became one of the world's greatest publishing ventures. It has sold millions, maybe billions of copies of Srila Prabhupada's books, of the Bhagavad Gita, of various other texts in the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and so on and so forth, right? So this, and they distributed and sold this in hundreds of languages across the world, right? And then that again requires, I mean, so much, there's a mention in my book, it would require Srila Prabhupada to choose what paper they would use. How much would that paper cost? How many copies? All the work that Milee does. Imagine this 70-year-old man was doing, who had no background in publishing. The work that work is picture. Some paper, this paper from Japan is good, but it's too expensive. Can we use lesser paper, but then it won't come out right? Imagine the amount of effort that it takes. And not that his disciples themselves were very trained in that. Many of the top disciples were hippies that he had picked up and trained, right? So it is quite a marvel in many ways that he was able to build this giant global movement and do all these fantastic things at a time when most people really look at retiring from life and, relaxing and so on and so forth.
Well, Hindol, I'm going to ask you one last question before I open the floor for questions from the audience. In this world of rapid economic growth in India, coupled with war and strife, um, how do you think the message of Srila Prabhupada is still relevant?
No, I certainly think that Srila Prabhupada's message is very, very relevant because, I think Srila Prabhupada is a reminder that there are few reminders. Number one, this idea, today we talk about Vishwaguru, that India has something to teach to the world is a very deep message in the life of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada went to America not to say that you will teach us something. Srila Prabhupada went to America and said, I will teach you something. Right? And it is my civilization and my culture and my roots and my tradition that has something better to teach you. So imagine, all those years ago, today we talk about Vishwaguru in our country, but all those years ago, Srila Prabhupada was making the argument that I have something better than what you have. And what was India at the time when he was, living? India was a very poor country, right? So imagine having the cultural confidence to tell Americans that I have something much better than what you have. So that is one great lesson, I think, from Srila Prabhupada's life. The other thing that Srila Prabhupada's life, I think, teaches us is the importance of having some sort of spiritual ingredient in your life. See, what has happened is today, most of our lives lack any spiritual interface. In our parents' generation also, people would go to the temple one day at least, no matter what religion you came from. The Christians would go to church on Sunday, the Muslims would go to namaz, Hindus would go to, sometimes they would fast one day, they would go to temple in the morning, something they would do. We are now in an age where that has been cut out from many people's lives, because people are constantly working and weekends are, again, many people are working on the weekends also, right? So that necessary thing to have that spiritual anchor and the need for that spiritual anchor to make you a better human being, I think is a great message. So when Srila Prabhupada's innovation was, Sri Chaitanya had to say that it doesn't matter who you are, if you take, and it doesn't matter what caste you come from and so on and so forth. If you say Hare Krishna, the Lord will love you, right? Just have to say the name of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada took it one step further and said you didn't even need to be Indian. Because surely Krishna is not only for Indians. Krishna is the Lord of the universe. So no matter who you are, if you are lovingly willing to say the name of the Lord, that love is available for you. Sorry, my apologies. So that is another great lesson, I think, we can learn from Srila Prabhupada's life.
Absolutely. Well, there's much more in the book, and I urge all of you to get a copy and read the book yourself. Hindol is also here, and he can sign your copy. I will now open the floor for questions. So if anyone has any questions, then please raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around. We'll just take a couple of questions. I think we are out of time. Okay, we'll take.
We do have one question there from.
Can you please pass the
yeah.
mic around?
Hello. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So there is a center of ISKCON in Paya itself. So I keep visiting there on weekends and I keep myself in touch with Krishna. But at the same time, sometimes materialism seizes me so much that sometimes I forget worshipping him. I do remember I do have him in my heart, but sometimes materialism attacks me and I do not feel there's so much pure of love for him in my heart sometimes, on some days particularly. So what would you suggest about that?
Look, this is the human journey, right? That is why if we could consistently retain the love of God, then we would be better human beings. We would be like a spiritual master, right? Your journey is no different from the journey of any of us. Sometimes we feel spiritual, sometimes we feel grounded and rooted, but sometimes we're distracted that, oh, now the latest iPhone has come, I have to go see Pathan, this, that, whatever. Yeah. All of that is there. Yeah. But you see, Srila Prabhupada's great lesson is that fine, all of this is there. If you can turn in all this chaos, if you can consistently turn your mind more and more. See, it's a muscle, it's a practice, right? It's like loving God is also a practice.
Definitely.
Turning towards God is also practice. The more you do it, the more your soul will turn towards the divine, right? And there will be distractions. In the early days, there will be distractions. It's like meditation, right? Is everybody able to do full meditation right in the beginning? No. The more you do it, the better you will get at it. And the more calm your mind will become.
Thank you. Also, one last question. As a devotee, we have this duty and responsibility of preach Krishna's words. So we have to be a preacher also at the same time. So if I want to convey my Krishna's word to a non-devotee who is not a preacher, who is just another individual, so he comes up with the concepts of science. So I believe in science, but I believe there is a supreme power in the universe, but I don't think there is a God. Of course, there is a creator of this universe, but again, science, comes up into this concept. So how to convince them, okay, science is also another thing, but spirituality, it doesn't discard the concept of spirituality
But
at the same time.
if you read Srila Prabhupada carefully, he never says dismiss science. He never says that, ever. He never says dismiss science. He urges a deeper understanding, right, of, where the journey that begins with science ends with God, so to speak, right? Einstein famously said, as we know more and more in science, we begin to understand the mind of God, right? So it's a bit like that. Srila Prabhupada does not say anyway deny science. Not at all. Quite on the contrary, many of the principles used by ISKCON are entirely scientific, right? So this is not science denialism, so to speak, at all, right? It's about understanding that there are things beyond the realm. And also remember, science is what you and I call science, is what our, faculties are able to gather, what we can hear. But remember, there are dimensions beyond what a human mind or a human eye or a human ear can actually gather, right? Dogs, for instance, can hear sound much higher at a much higher level than you and I can, right? Bats can see in darkness that you and I cannot see. So imagine if that be true, there are many dimensions to this thing called life that you and I as human being and our scientific understanding can only gather that much. In fact, I would argue with each passing day, as science tells us more and more about understanding life and human beings, we are going closer and closer to Indian traditional religious and spiritual beliefs. Because what the seers and the spiritual masters in India gathered instinctively, science is today showing us through equations and formula and experiments. The seers understood this instinctively, right?
Certainly. Which book of Srila Prabhupada you would suggest to? Just a last question.
We have one more question, ma'am, so please.
We'll have to move on, please.
We have
There's a
one
lady
more
at the back.
question.
Connect you on personal basis after the event. Thank
It really uphill task.
Yeah, Satya, that's a great question. But my process is always the same. You see, I always try to locate my characters in the wider world, because I write often about these spiritual, masters and characters. Often they tend to be writing about them or understanding them tends to be dislocated in a sense from the world. If you read my book, I place Srila Prabhupada and all the people who read it and loved it. And you'd see many of their names at the back cover and so on and so forth. That's one of the things people have consistently pointed out, that essentially writing about Srila Prabhupada or understanding Srila Prabhupada was often unidimensional. It's almost like he suddenly sprung up from somewhere and did something. But he was as much a part of the world and a product of his time. Often spiritual gurus are not seen to be products of their time. They are seen to be these isolated bubbles. But that's never true. Srila Prabhupada was as much a product of his time as Vivekananda was product of his time. Their responses were products of his time. I'll give you one example. Srila Prabhupada, when he goes to San Francisco, realizes that these giant music festivals are happening there, right? And he's, of course, trying to always wonder, how can I get more and more people to the love of Krishna? So he says, well, what can I offer in this city which is having these gigantic music festivals, these anti-war music festivals. He says, well, I'll bring the Rath Yatra of Puri onto the streets of San Francisco, which will be bigger, more, more glamorous in a sense, more exciting than anything the city had ever seen. So he's as much a product of his times as, as his spirituality in a sense is eternal, right? So that's my process always. So apart from reading the ISKCON archives and so on and so forth and his own voluminous writings, I also read a lot of associated material. What else was happening in those years around him, in the various cities that he lived in the people he interacted with, and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much. We'll take no further questions on this session. Thank you so much for a lovely session. Life indeed is a practice and we'll learn as we go. Thank you so much for being an amazing audience. We'll request you to please take your seats and we'll move on to our next session. I request our volunteers to trends in literature. Literature is moving ahead, and so is the way we see literature and the writing. Really looking forward to this session with panelists Alka Sarogi, Paramita Satpathy, Gagan Gill, Abhay K, and Madhu Kankaria, Ranjit Hoskote in conversation with Lalit Kumar. I request all of our panelists to please come up on the dais. The chairs are getting arranged shortly.